The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall. I play Hera Syndulla on Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you always.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
You're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, where we talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away. From movies to books, TV shows, and more, we're looking at the deeper themes and meanings found in the Star Wars universe. Be sure to follow The Secrets of Star Wars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, your favorite podcast app, or on the StarQuest YouTube channel. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuest, on X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And be sure to get your official Secrets of Star Wars gear at sqpn.com/merch. I'm your host, Patrick Mason, and joining me tonight on the panel is Jeff Haecker. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Sagrona, Pat. Doing pretty well.
Sagrona Teema, Jeff. I don't know if that's an actual, like, a proper greeting. I'm not sure exactly how you're supposed to use it. But yes, that is what we are discussing tonight. Sagrona Teema, the second episode of Andor Season 2. And to kick us off, Jeff, let's go through the summary.
All right. So on this episode, Dedra tries to be removed from the Gorman project, but Partagaz advises her it is a gift. Cyril has been promoted at his bureaucratic job and is in a relationship with Dedra as they prepare for an event that they've been putting off. The preparations for Lita's wedding continue. Perrin accuses Mon of having an affair with Tekolma, and Perrin gives his Sagrona toast, while Mon learns Tekolma wants recompense for his assistance and to keep his silence. Luthen tells Mon that Tay is a liability. On Mina Rao, the former Ferric citizens prepare to leave their temporary home as the Empire closes in on their identities as migrants not holding up to inspection. And finally, Cassian is held prisoner by the rebel Maya Peg Brigade, who starts to devolve into infighting, but they think playing 5 hands with Roski rules can resolve their issues. The creatures from the jungle attack. Cassian is able to steal the TIE Avenger back and escape the jungle planet, revealed to be Yavin 4, future home of the rebel base. Sagrona Teema.
Sagrona Teema! All right, so our second episode in Andor. Now, Jeff, you're relatively new to the panel. You weren't here last, or 2 years ago, I guess, now, for the original Andor. You haven't been on any of the other Andor shows we've done yet. So before we get into kind of some of this episode's particulars, I wanted to ask you, generally, what are your feelings about Andor, the character, and both his portrayal in Rogue One and in the show, Andor Season 1, and then so far, just as little or as much as you want to give, we can talk about.
Yeah. Well, I was on the Andor Season 1 recap, so we.
Oh, you were. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
But just as a brief, I do really like Cassian as a character, and I'm glad we're getting this. Like, Rogue One is maybe my favorite of the Disney era films. It's close with Force Awakens, but it's definitely one of the top spots, and I do really like Cassian as a character, and I'm glad we're getting his backstory kind of more fleshed out in this show. And I really did enjoy Season 1. I'm glad it wasn't just focused on Cassian, because I've really liked getting Mon Mothma's storyline. I've liked getting the Luthen storyline, the Dedra storyline. Like, it's all really good, and I think if it was just focused on Cassian alone, it may not have been as interesting. I do like Cassian as a character, and I like seeing his journey through these arcs as we inch closer and closer to Rogue One. Kind of seeing how he started as in the Season 1 is, just kind of kind of a street smart guy, just trying to, scam day to day to make it, and up to how we see him. I believe he's a captain by rank in Andor or in Rogue One in the Alliance intelligence. So I don't think he's been assigned a rank yet based on these 2 episodes. I don't think he's really kind of just working for Luthen at this point, and may not even be full. I mean, the Alliance itself isn't really fully formed yet, so there's really not an Alliance intelligence service. It's kind of just the cells doing kind of their own thing, really, as we see in this episode with the Maya Pay Brigade. And yeah, no, I do really like. I like how it's seeing his growth as a character, though, from season 1 to season 2 so far. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how the rest of the season plays out, leading us right into his first/final appearance in Rogue One. So
yeah, so let's break into it. I think I'd like to start, and we can go anywhere we want with this, but I think I'd like to start with the Rebel faction, what we see from them on this. And I say Rebel faction, I mean this Maya Brigade that has Andor captive, and what we get from them through the course of this episode. And of course, like all of these episodes, it's cut, and in traditional Star Wars fashion, you have very short scenes that are clipped into each other, and so we revolve around these kind of 4 arcs. You've got what's going on with Andor. You've got Dedra and Cyril, who we have confirmed as a couple in this episode. Weirdest couple ever. We've got the wedding feast,
basically.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. In the wedding feast, and then you've got what's going on the farming planet. And I think it'd be hard to talk about it if we went straight through. So I think what I'd like to do is sort of just talk about each of those storylines as we go. What did you think about this sort of portrayal of this rebel group?
Yeah, they were comedic, just kind of almost showing how, like, when you get something like this, like some kind of big rebellion, as it's building up, it's going to be made up of all kinds of people. And we see very throughout the stories we've seen in other shows like Rebels and such, you see very competent rebel cells like the Phoenix Squadron, like the Ghost Crew. Eventually we'll see, I think they call it the Masasi group, is General Donana's group. All very competent cells, but it also makes sense that you would have very incompetent cells as well, of just probably random people who are, kind of fed up with what the Empire is doing, but aren't really trained or don't really have street smarts and are just kind of like their body to fill a spot, on a mission or something. And yeah, we don't really learn in this episode what the Maya Pay Brigade is. We just learn that their leader was killed, and that's kind of all we know at this point. I don't think there's really anything we know more than that. They're just kind of a rebel cell that was, maybe they were a contact of Luthen's or something, but they also seem very, like, Luthen wouldn't ally with these people, so I don't know. Right.
Like we get that they had been buying stuff from Andor. Like they Andor, Maya was a buyer, I think is what he literally calls her, a buyer, if I remember correctly. And that, from Andor's perspective, they're on the same team, same rebellion, but they're all like, whose rebellion? The other piece I think we get is that not Maya's, but one of the character's brothers, they had a ship and he stole the ship, quote unquote. Some of them seem to believe he took the ship to go look for survivors. From what, we don't know. I assume the thing that killed Maya, right? But we don't really get any information about that. And that, I think that's really interesting that we have so little information about this group. When we had the last set of sort of small rebel faction on display in Andor in season 1, it was this group on Aldhani that was getting ready for the heist, right? And they all seemed to be at least fairly competent individuals. They knew what they were doing. They knew what they're about. They all had their own stories, their reason for being there. This group is so different from that group. They're just sort of this motley crew who doesn't really seem to know what they are or who they are.
Yeah, they almost made me think of like they were maybe they were just like mercenaries, or they were just kids on a planet or something that they're like, yeah, you're not doing anything, you want to make some money, let's come work for the rebellion. And like, yeah, they're just don't really seem to know what's going on. And maybe Maya Pei was the leader, as their leader, was like keeping them in line and keeping them focused. But when she's gone, now they're kind of unfocused as they kind of fight over their leadership. And one other, I forget who is who, but one other interesting bit of trivia is the two leaders of these two factions within the Maya Pei Brigade. One of them is Tony Gilroy's son, the actor, who Gilroy is the creator of Andor, and I can't remember, the other one's another relation, like a nephew or something. So I just thought that was funny that one of his kids and another relation or friend or something were the one were kind of these goofy leaders of this survivors of this rebel faction.
Yeah, I mean, that must be why the dialogue is so very real seeming, is because they've been backbiting each other as family for their whole lives.
Exactly. Even playing a space rock paper scissors, apparently.
Yeah, right. Super complex 4-man rock paper scissors. There's some sort of claw
with seconds and
yeah, like the most complicated. It's interesting. We have kind of both groups trying to figure out the food situation, with the one group talking about moldy rations and the other group trying to eat these terrible smelling melons, which I'm sure didn't go well. And then dealing with the fact that there's these animals out there, which is sort of, it's the opening scene we get, I think, in this episode is these, both sides have sent out a single person crawling on the ground looking for their dead compatriots who, if you, in the last episode, one of the guys gets called a liar and he shoots the girl and then he gets shot. Then everybody runs to their respective ships and they're shooting at each other. And so they're going out to get these bodies, but the bodies aren't there. Like, the animals have eaten them. And then at the end of the episode, we get to see one of them, and it's pretty terrifying, I gotta admit.
Yeah. And I mean, there's some lore here for anyone unfamiliar, because these, at least in the legends, I don't know as much in the canon storylines, but in the legends, the pre-Disney storyline, the Masasi temples, they were actually, the Masasi were descended from the actual Sith species, who were an alien species that were kind of affluent or very strong on the dark side, and were eventually conquered by some of the I think there were human Sith lords, and they kind of eventually interbred into kind of one thing, but the Masasi were kind of an offshoot of them. And so these creatures could be, and like the Sith were real big into alchemy and like using dark side to twist already living creatures. So these things could be like twisted by the dark side, or at least descended from those experiments, if that storyline was continuing on. So I kind of had that in mind when you see these creatures, because like I said, you see as Cassian's flying away in the end, you see these temples, which will become the rebel base by the time of Rogue One and New Hope. So I like that connection to the lore there. Like, maybe that's what they are, is these like twisted creatures, or they could just be native native bear hogs or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they look kind of like a hippo rhinoceros, sort of a combination, where it just runs by and eats that guy whole, and you're like, at least from what I could tell, it ate a guy as it ran by, and I was like, whoa, like that's pretty intense there. Yeah, I do kind of wonder how much of the sort of ancient Sith lore will eventually get brought in, if at all, from Legends. because it especially from the comics, there was such an expansive amount of it. And I always thought it was interesting. The Sith went through this period of, right, the race of Sith. It was sort of like the interbreeding with them, like whoever, like having more of the Sith racist blood in your bloodstream was a really good thing for a while. And then after a certain point, it went the other way. And suddenly, like, having too much Sith blood made you like a lower level life form. And it's just this, it was one of those things about the dark side. It's sort of interesting but dumb kind of a thing. But I do wonder about that. I wonder if they're going to do anything with that with Yavin. We'll see.
Probably not in Andor, but maybe in something in the future. Because later in the Legends books, that's where Luke Skywalker starts the Jedi Temple, or restarts the Jedi Order. As he opens a training academy on Yavin, and there's Sith ghosts coming around and causing trouble. So it'd be interesting if they ever did anything with that. But I kind of think they'll probably steer away from that, because they kind of have, Luke's academy was I forget where it was in canon, but it was somewhere else. So, but they could go back and do something else there.
No, you never know. I liked the portrayal of Andor in this as sort of a very practical character. Like, everybody else is sort of fighting in and amongst themselves and sort of dissolving into the factions, and he's just like, hey, we need to get a tarp out and capture some water, or
start a perimeter. I was going to do that.
Right.
That's a good idea.
It's a good idea. Yeah. And he does the math really quick. Yeah, they can move it 5 meters by midnight, and that'll be really close enough that they could shoot us. Them trying to move this TIE fighter, which is just like, I think that speaks to the desperation of what's happening with this group.
Yeah, because their whole thing is they're trying to, because they have no way to get off this planet, because Cassian's contact was Porco, who is dead, and we don't see him, so maybe he was eaten or something. But I think he's in Porco's ship, is where he's being kind of held, because he knew there was that blaster. He knew there was he knew where things were in the ship. So I think that was Porco's ship, and maybe how he initially got there.
Well, it might have been his ship. There's some thoughts that that's the ship he had from at the end of season 1 of Andor that Brazo and Bix all escaped in. Right. It's that ship.
Okay. Yeah.
Because when he gets there, he says, "What did you do to my ship?"
Oh yeah. Okay.
And because the Porco was going to be flying the TIE fighter at that point.
Oh right. Okay.
And Cassian was going to fly away on the ship, but then we don't know what happened to Porco, but it didn't seem like it was good.
Yeah, and that was an interesting name choice too, because of course there's Jack Porkins from from New Hope, R.A.P. Porkins.
Porkins.
What that it just seemed, I don't know if they were just trying to draw like a connection of like, hey, remember Porkins? Like, here's a name that sounds familiar, like maybe kind of hinting at Yavin. I don't know. It just seemed, it was kind of, if it wasn't related, it was a very kind of interesting choice there. But
yeah,
obviously he's dead, so we probably won't ever worry about him again.
Yeah, sadly, the untold story. Yeah. So, but and I think the practicality, Andor's practicality and his quietness, that eventually leads to his finding an escape route, which gets helped by the monster attack. I do wonder if he would have been able to pull off an escape without that, though. Because if the guy comes running out and they're not being attacked by monsters, do they go and find Andor? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably would have tried to kind of like pit them against each other, like because their whole thing is they were fighting over who's going to get to leave on this ship, because there's not room for everyone. And you can't really, they don't seem trustworthy enough to come back for you if you're left. So they were fighting kind of over who would get to go on the ship and who would have to stay. And they're running out, like we said, they're running out of food. Their only options are these really nasty melons or anything else they can find. So
moldy ration bars.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think eventually he would have because he's very street smart, and I think he could have found a way to pit them against each other. But I think for the sake of time, because each of these arcs of episodes. So this is the middle of the first arc is 4 years before Yavin, and then the next set of episodes 4 through 6, are 3 years before Yavin. So we're like, if they were doing more seasons, like each season a year, they could definitely get into that. But I think because of the time, they, like, let's just have the bear rhinoceros or whatever they are come and solve that problem for us.
Yeah, I feel like, and this is something I've talked to a couple people about, but this first set of 3 episodes feels a lot like it was a whole bunch of different ideas that got pitched for like the full season. And they're like, yeah, do that all, but do it in the first 3 episodes. And they're like, okay. And so it's kind of crammed.
Yeah, I can kind of see that because, I'm caught up on, we're not spoiling ahead, but I'm caught up in as the season has progressed, like they're definitely moving in a certain, there's one specific thing that's kind of, it seems like we're leading up to in the next batch of episodes. So I think like that's probably a good theory, a good idea is like, let's have these random one-off things that we can do early on when we're just hinting at the main plot and we're not there yet. Because this is second episode of 12, so you can play a little bit more early on before you like really have to kind of ratchet it up into the main story of the season. Yeah,
and I do kind of, and I'll probably talk about this a little more when we talk about episode 3, but I do feel like if Disney is willing to blow as much money as they're willing to blow on these Star Wars shows, can't we just get like a full 12 or 24 episode season per year? Couldn't we do that? Couldn't we just do that? Okay, all right, that's enough. I won't gripe too much more.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're moving away from that, honestly, because there's the only like show coming out after this that's live action that we know of is Ahsoka season 2, and aside from that, it's movies. So yeah, I think they're kind of moving away from that model, but hopefully not. I would love more stuff, but it seems like they're steering away from that anyway.
Yeah. So, I think we don't get much from either Cyril or Dedra. It's very brief scenes, but they're just very interesting, I think. So what did you think about these two?
Yeah, I mean, it's having seen the next episode where this really gets where it's a much bigger part. I'm
looking forward to that conversation.
It's a much smaller thing here, and of course, knowing what the event is that they are leading up, that they're preparing for, is just really funny in retrospect. But yeah, I got the sense at the end of season 1 of Andor that Cyril was obsessed with. I think his obsession with Cassian and trying to be the super cop or whatever was, I think he kind of fixated on Dedra as well. And because you kind of see he went to save her at the end of season 1, but I didn't really get the sense that was like, I felt that it was kind of a one-sided relationship, really. But this kind of indicates that it's not, that there is more to it, and we'll definitely see more of that in the next episode. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting couple that they make. And yeah, his whole thing is he's finally settled into his bureaucratic job, but not only settled in, but he seems to be a supervisor or something, because he's training the new guy or bringing the new guy in, and he's kind of giving a grand speech of there are no small jobs or whatever in the I think it's the Bureau of States and of weights and
it's standards, like weights and measures, standards, Yep.
So he's definitely self-important.
There's no small jobs here, and there's a million people in that room with the non-cube cubicles. They're sort of not rounded edges, but kind of cut cornered edges.
Yeah,
no small jobs. Then he gives it's just this, like, it's the most intense bureaucratic conversation I've ever seen. Like, it's just like where he's just trying to portray this. I caught this ring of people who were smuggling stuff, and this is there's a future here for those who dare. Like, there's just, it's like,
I mean, it's like, it's like in modern, joking about work and stuff. It's like he's the guy that's drank the Kool-Aid of the office and, is using the corporate buzz speak and all the corporate lingo and is, really, really maybe too high on himself, like some leaders of these big tech companies and such are. So, yeah, that was. I mean, it was just funny, but I mean, it's interesting to see because as we'll see in the upcoming episodes, he seems to actually be good at his job, surprisingly, because he wasn't really good at his last job. So,
yeah.
So, well, I mean, maybe not. He was good, but maybe he was a little too over the top. But this one seems like a good fit for him. So,
yeah. Well, and that's I think that goes kind of to who Cyril is, or the personality we get about him. He is, he's very focused. He's got an attention for detail, but he's not necessarily a leader. And or I shouldn't say it that way. He's not a leader. Like that is on full display in season 1, over the course of that show, but he is extremely focused and extremely detail oriented. And when you have a guy like that in a place doing standards and measures, I mean, that's the kind of guy you want. Like that's the guy who's going to be able to tear through the data to find the things that don't fit to do his job really, really well. And at the same time, like, the police work takes an extreme amount of nuance to figure out, especially when you're at the detective level. And, guys who are that focused, you see them in the workplace, they tend to like, well, there's only really one way to solve a problem. I have to hit it with a hammer. And I'm like, that's not always the way to do it. If you're an armorer, then yes, this is the way. You hit it with the hammer. But when you're not, when you're in the field,
it's funny thinking that because Dedra is much more subtle and much more, she's much more. She gathers the details, but she also understands the nuance of things and how to be subtle. And it's like she's actually kind of the maybe good for him. I mean, maybe not good for anyone else, but good for him in that regard because. Like she can kind of direct that energy a little bit, and there's I posted some memes on the Discord of Dedra and Cyril, but there's some funny ones out there, especially as we see in the next episode. But for Dedra though, like it was interesting her because she was given the job of Gorman, the Gorman project by Krennic last episode, and here she's talking to Partagas, who's kind of become her mentor. And she doesn't want it. Like she wants to go back to the Axis desk, but she kind of, he's kind of also telling her like, you're becoming obsessed with this guy and you have nothing to show for it. So here's this other thing you can do that you can kind of make a name for yourself. And Partagas was actually like, I'm wondering if he's sick or something. Cause he's looks a little bit rough, like at least health wise. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just the makeup or lighting or something, but he looked like less healthy than before, and I think, and then even in the next set of episodes, the same. So, like, I'm wondering if they're showing. I mean, he's older, but I don't know if they're showing. If we're like meant to understand he's deteriorating or something in any way. But I noticed that in this episode, so I don't know if that's a thing we'll come back to. But yeah, he's, that just was interesting that he's like, she's kind of his star pupil, and he's telling her to do this, and she's like, she should take it as a gift because she can really make a name for herself.
Yeah. I've always enjoyed his character as he's just a very competent boss. I wouldn't necessarily call him a leader, but he's a very competent manager. And the way he's handling Dedra and the way he handles this whole thing, I love how he starts that conversation out when she says she doesn't want the job, and he's like, "Oh, how it is to be reminded of our place in the and she's like, I don't know what you mean by that. And he's like, look, you're about to be, superseding me. Like you're basically on the threshold of this, and it's going to look like a demotion. But the reality is, like, you effectively have through Krennic a direct line to the Emperor. And if you pull this off, like, the sky's the limit. And I like how he puts it, Gorman's a gift, take it and win it. And I think that speaks a lot to how he views everything that's going on. We get that speech from him in Andor season 1 where he asks, what do we do here at the ISB? And Dedra gives, we security and we check on things. And he's like, no, that's not what we do at all. Like that's what the Navy's for. You want security, call the Navy, bring a battalion in, get some stormtroopers on the ground. Like, we're doctors. We go in, we treat infections, we excise them, we use our scalpels. And him putting in the terms of a game, like win it, right? And so it makes it, from his perspective, he doesn't see the rebellion necessarily in the threat in the same way like the Emperor or Darth Vader or whoever would. In sort of this military thing. To him, this is real spycraft. Like he is, in his mind, I think very similar to probably how Luthen views what he's doing. And they're trying to outmaneuver each other. And he's telling Dedra, no, this is good. And if you do this, you can outmaneuver this guy, and then don't worry about access. You made him famous, but you couldn't produce him. So we'll handle that on this side. I do think it's interesting that we get the scene, the opening of the home scene with Dedra as she's listening to opera. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the most, I don't pay as much attention to the music. Like, I'll notice it, but I didn't necessarily pay attention. But I see, that when you pointed out, that is interesting that she's kind of like, because as we learned in the last episode, she was raised in the Kinderblock, like in a group home kind of a thing. And so she's getting into this higher culture that she probably either didn't have access to or like only kind of dreamed about. So I'm curious if she finds the opera as like she likes it because she likes the music, or she finds something interesting in the composition, or if it's kind of an air that she's putting on of because she was raised in this in the Kinderblock, and this we don't know the conditions of that. It doesn't sound great. So I would assume she probably wasn't listening to a lot of opera, but maybe she was like reading what she could about it or something. Maybe she found out. I mean, I guess they have the HoloNet internet or whatever. So
yeah, she
probably could get whatever she wants. But yeah, that was an interesting point though, that she's kind of listening to that. So
yeah, and it's interesting because when you have a character listen to classical music, right? Usually what you're trying to portray with that character is some sort of deep insight, like they're thinking, they're contemplating something, they're puzzling something out, they're moving through something. Opera's a little different because while classical music often does have a story setting and is often set around a particular tale or story, and as we all know, the vast majority of classical music are set in and around Jesus Christ and the whole of the Old and New Testament. That wouldn't necessarily be the truth in the Star Wars universe. I have a feeling, but opera is very much a story, right? And you're listening to someone singing through the story, and if you know the words to what they're saying, which it kind of seemed like she did, because I think she was singing along to it, you have this sort of thought process, like she is getting lost in this story through song, through the opera. And so the question in my mind is like, what's the story? Like, what is important enough to her that she would take the time and effort needed to put this on at home and listen to it in her what must be very small amount of spare time while she's effectively waiting for Cyril to get home. So I do wonder about that. I don't know if we'll ever find out. I do find that as an interesting little insight into like who her character is. I also love, you don't get much. It's maybe 3 minutes between her and Cyril, but you realize they're a couple, and you're kind of like, it's funny because like at first I thought this was some sort of ruse, like that they were living together as some sort of intelligence ruse. And but like, you know, after she kind of touches his lips and says we can't cancel again, and then of course what we get in the next episode, you know, it's not, at least just unless it's a really deep ruse. But man, what a weird group or couple.
Yeah, they're interesting for sure, and yeah, I mean, I can say without spoiling that they're in the further episodes. It doesn't seem like it's a ruse, but if it is, it's a very, like you said, a very complex ruse. But
yeah. Okay, so enough about them. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what's going on our farming world. But I mean, what from all that, what kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, so that was, I mean, it's really kind of slow. So it's with doing the show the way they're doing, like with these kind of 2 episodes of kind of build up and then 1 episode of kind of payoff after the build up. Like I've heard it kind of described as you're setting the table for 2 episodes and then you eat your meal in the 3rd episode. They're really like slowly kind of ratcheting up like in the 1st episode, they kind of start talking about the Empire, you know, the Imperial inspection of this world is happening. It's you know, in the past it was a more casual inspection, but they're kind of dropping hints throughout the episodes of the 1st and the 2nd that they're kind of looking deeper into what's going on, because, and we don't know if it's because they're suspecting anything or it's just because the Empire is just being the Empire and just, you know, wanting to tighten their grip on everything. So yeah, kind of learning that you're kind of getting the sense that and I mean, it's made very clear in this episode that the identity of the 3 Phyrexians of Brasso, Bix, and Willman, and I guess B2 as well, but probably less so him, are like their identities aren't going to hold up if these inspectors show up, because they're kind of impersonating, or I mean, they're acting as migrant workers, but they kind of don't have any document showing where they came from. They probably don't have, you know, like chain codes or whatever the Empire's using. So they probably don't have the paper trail to show that they're legal, you know, that they're legal here. And if they look up their identities, then maybe they can trace them back to Ferrix and, you know, learn that they were tied to Cassian or something. So you're kind of getting the sense that they need to start planning their out. And they're waiting to hear from Cassian as well. So I think that's part of it too, is that Cassian, I don't think he's like living with them on this planet in his off time. I think he's kind of doing missions for Luthen, and in exchange, Luthen's kind of set this up for them to be safe. But they're kind of waiting to hear from him to see, you know, if he's coming back or what's going on. So I like that it's kind of building slowly up to, you know, the Empire kind of things coming to a head. Like I said, it's the middle episodes. This buildup is still, it's happening, but it's still kind of slow. But I think it's good setup for what comes in the next one. So yeah, no, I like this section, but I mean, it's starting it shows the, like, really kind of I think you called it I forget what you said in the Andor recap, like something brutality, like disinterested brutality.
Disinterested brutality. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause you have the officer who's kind of starting to creep on Bix.
Right.
And you get the sense he's probably done
Lieutenant.
this. Right. He's done this many times. And there's probably, you know, innumerable Imperial officers who have done this and who can do this because the system like enables them to. So yeah, it's kind of
right. Like, so, you know, I think in my mind, that's probably having dealt with large scale regulation and bureaucracy in several of my jobs. It's in my mind one of the most evil things about bureaucracies, and why I you know, personally am very much against them. and because what they do is they tend to empower people to take advantage of other people who are being hurt by the system and who really need the system's assistance. But because they're in the power of the system, it enables the bureaucracy and bureaucrats to take advantage of them and to abuse them. And this is seen almost in any kind of system. And I like how it's put in this episode, and then it's put even more starkly in the next episode. But in this episode, it's put, by one of the farmers, and he says, they need the grain, they know we need help, and they know everyone isn't legal, right? And then, so that is this is the law. It's been set up this way, but we know it's not tenable, and we're going to set up a bureaucracy to manage it. And the bureaucrats within the bureaucracy and the people who are enforcing it all know it's not tenable. And we see this play out. I think modern politics, a lot of people would point to certain aspects of what's going on in the political situation in the United States. But this was how this was why the Roman tax collectors were hated by the Jews, was because they had a situation set up whereby the Roman taxing authority said, you have to tax people's goods. You're allowed to take this much. This is the amount that you get to keep. And the amount that the tax collector got to keep wasn't enough to live on. And so effectively the system was set up telling the tax collector on the side, hey, take more than you need so that you can have a good life. And we see that, like we see Jesus tell them very specifically when they ask, I'm a tax collector, how do I reconcile with the law? And he tells them, don't take more than you're prescribed to. And I think any bureaucratic system set up like this, and all human institutions that aren't backed by God are going to fail, and all bureaucracies are human institutions. I think they all lead to this kind of abuse, the abuse, that we see coming down the line. And it takes a certain road here, and I think it's done for very specific dramatic reasons. But money exploitation is common, labor exploitation common. Any system that's set up where all parties involved know that the system is not legal results in the members of the bureaucracy being able to take advantage of the people who are, underneath the system. And so I think this is a really good display of how that plays out within the Empire, within Star Wars. And interesting enough, we've seen it in Mandalorian under the New Republic, because we saw it any time, especially season 3, I think, when they go to the New Republic and they try and get help for the Outer Rim, and the New Republic is basically like, look, we don't have, we can't give you anything, and we don't even know what you're saying is true, and it was all of this kind of side mouth talk.
Yeah, and I was also kind of wondering, because if you've seen the other Star Wars content like Rebels and the Tales series, there's a Tales of the Jedi episode. I think it's the final one, where Ahsoka basically has to face off against an Inquisitor on this farming world because she's found out to be a Jedi when one of the farmers called in the Inquisitors, and they came and torched the village. But she's able to call upon Bail Organa and get these farmers, after she beats the Inquisitors, able to get the farmers to go with Bail. So, this is probably happening. If these rebel cells are all kind of operating and coalescing, they're probably facing similar things of finding an imperial oppression, escaping the oppression. But what do you do with the people until you have a base set up, where everyone can go, like a base like Dantooine or eventually Yavin. But you also need, because we don't know, they don't know how long it will be until they beat the Empire. They're still very early on, so they're going to need food production too. So I kind of took the sense of Luthen is probably there's probably a cut of these food supplies are going to go to Luthen's interests that can then be spread out to whatever he needs them for too. I don't know if maybe that's just me reading into it, but I kind of had that thought too of maybe Luthen is collecting some as well to to fund or feed his rebellion. So
right, yeah, there's a question mark about how did these people get here, right? Because it doesn't seem like the locals, while they're not terribly interested in the Empire, or they don't really seem to like the Empire very much, they don't also strike you as part of the rebellion, right? It's not a bunch of embedded rebel agents. The main, I guess the town elder mayor, whoever Brazo and Bix and Woman talk to, and who relays the information about what the Empire is doing. He doesn't seem to be a part of the rebellion, right? He's just a farmer, and yeah, they're on an imperial world, but the reality is he's just there to run a shop and sell grain and live his life.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think he's
their
direct employer. I think they're working for him, like they're doing the work for his farms and that are feeding into his shops. At least that's what I took from it.
Yeah. Yeah, so we touched on Lieutenant Creepy. I don't know what his actual name is, but
I think it's I want to say it's something like Nick Kroll or something, which I know Nick Kroll is an actor, but I think the character was also named something like that.
Yeah.
From what I remember, what I saw online about it. Let me see if I can find it.
But he does give us, yeah. Oh, did you find it?
Oh, I was trying to see. But he's very creepy and very like. Yeah, he doesn't do anything bad yet, but you get the sense that something's coming in this coming soon. Because he's showing an interest in Bix, and he's trying to invite her to like the town festival or like the region festival or something.
I think it's just like the big city that's close by.
Okay, maybe, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And he gives us a piece of information we didn't have before, which ratchets up the dramatic tension, right? And that is that the whole of he relays this information to Bix. The whole of the planet is under like a comms blackout. And we get that from, I can't remember her name, but Luthen's comms agent.
Leia.
Yeah. So the very beginning of this episode, we get that conversation between those two on Chandrila. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say that, but either way. But she says, there's been a basically radio silence for inspection, and Luthen says, what does that mean? And she says, I don't know, because I don't have good comms. And she convinces him to send her back. And this is, this set him, the Imperial officer, basically explaining the comms blackout, her understanding, Bix's understanding of it, Andor being held up by this group of, misguided rebels, and then Luthen's comm network not being fully active at this time basically gives us the dramatic tension that's the payoff for episode 3, because everybody is at least like partially in the dark. Nobody knows exactly what's going on with the other parties, right? Nobody on around knows where Cassian is, and then they find out they can't even try to find out because they're under a comms blackout. Cassian can't get a hold of anybody because he's being tied up. and while he gets away at the very end of this episode, we see kind of how that plays out in the next one. And, Luthen is in the dark, which I'm sure is a place he loves to be.
Yeah. I think it's maybe it might be in the 4 through 6 block, but, and this isn't really, this won't spoil anything, but I think we're getting the sense that Luthen, like he says that in one of those episodes, something along the lines of like, there's too much information. Like there's too much going on. There's too many, he's got too many balls in the air that he's trying to juggle, and it's starting to become a little bit of a burden. And yeah, this is because this is again, that's a year later from this. And this is this episode 2 is a year after season 1, when he was kind of like his kind of first big moment was the Aldhani heist, was kind of the first big thing he did. I mean, I guess there was the Ferrex thing where he was, they were trying to capture him in the first place, but really Aldhani is what set him up as kind of the big, set him up as an enemy against the ISB. So yeah, I think we're starting to see the stress, and the cracks form in his in his Batman mask of, he's putting on this character of this art collector, but in reality, like he's really just, basically dead inside and just wants to see the Empire destroyed. So.
Right. And so, Luthen is on Chandrila, and we have an interesting couple of things happen. And I really think the Chandrila stuff is the highlight, in my opinion, of this episode.
Yeah, I think so too.
So what stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, this was like I said, Perrin has been a character that I think I don't like Perrin, I will say, but I think he's at least
I like
improved
Perrin
a little bit.
I'm
okay.
I will say, I mean, he's an unfortunate character in a lot of ways, but as a character, like, I wouldn't like him as a person,
right?
But I like him as a character.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. I enjoy him as a character, but yeah, I wouldn't want to, I feel bad for Mon being married to him because they were married as children as well, so like they've had a lot of ups and downs, but yeah, his and if you've read, I've talked about it before, that there was the book that just came out, that was kind of the Mask of Fear book about, primarily about Mon Mothma's early, like just after the events of Revenge of the Sith, where she's kind of is targeted by the ISB as like being under suspicion of being anti-Empire and whatnot. But one of the things that book sets up is she to kind of keep herself safe, she kind of alludes, lets others know, or alludes to the fact that she's had an affair with somebody, and that comes into play here because, and she didn't. That comes into play here because Perrin is accusing her of having an affair with Tay Kolma, because Tay Kolma has been, he's in a bad spot because his wife has left him. He's had investments turn bad. And we come to find out he's basically is trying to shake Mon down. And she goes to Luthen about it, and Luthen's like, I think in the next episode, it's you get the hint here, but in the next episode, it's especially clear that, Tay's a liability, and that, that something needs to happen about that. So that I thought was the most interesting part of setting up Mon in this way of she's going to have to, she's going to have to make a decision here on, if she's can you appease this guy? Can you give him enough money to make him go away and never bother you? Or is it one of those things he's always going to come back asking for more? Because he's basically given up everything, he's lost investments because of what's happened with the rebellion. And he kind of blames her and wants what's his to make up for it.
Yeah. Yeah, you get this, Tay's story really comes to a head in this episode, and it's sort of dealt with in the next one, where Tay kind of just lays it out for Mon. He says, look, you got what you wanted, you're secure, the foundation set up, your, past problematic financial stuff has all been swept under the cover. The guy I found for you that pulled that off, he seems to be pretty happy with what he's gotten out of all this. And I had a bunch of my investments soured by the rebellion. I've lost my wife. I'm in a bad spot. And, you're an old friend of mine, and you wouldn't even talk to me. And so really at this point, I'm treating you less like a friend and more like you owe me. And, kind of what that means to Mon when she figures out, Tay, because Tay is an old friend. And we get that very much season 1, this feeling of, oh, he's an old friend, and he goes from being just an old friend to being an ally, and he's helping her. So this all feels very betrayal-ish. Maybe not full-blown betrayal to her, and at the same time to Luthen, this is starting to scream liability, right? Because if he wants to shake Mon down for money and he doesn't get what he wants, what does he do? And that's what's going through Luthen's mind. How much does he know? How much can he put her in trouble? And how quickly does she come back to me? How well will Mon stand up to ISB level torture? Right.
Right. And she's like I was saying in that book, she was tortured. Maybe not like tortured with pain, like them jabbing her with needles and stuff, but they like locked her up in a room for multiple days without, food and water and whatnot. So like she's already been in that and that kind of situation, in the canon storyline. And yeah, I also kind of had the thought of, it, Mona's can be a liability to Luthen too. So if like things go too far, like if it goes far enough where she would potentially identify Luthen to the ISB, like Luthen would have no, compunction about pulling the trigger on her and getting rid of her or her family. I think it'd probably be more of like he would threaten her family more than anything. Like he kind of threatened Lonnie's family from season 1 who's the ISB guy that's kind of his mole in the ISB. I think he would, probably threaten her family more than her. But yeah, that was definitely like there's so much going on with that, like so many levels of like everybody's playing these games to, figure out, how trustworthy is somebody and what's my contingency if that fails, if they fail or whatnot. So and it's an interesting idea with the rebellion because we've always had kind of the rebellion is this high ideal, but I like seeing how it's realistically it would be like this, especially in the spycraft world. Like you're going to have people like Cassian says he's not a hero or says something like that in Rogue One. We're murderers, we're assassins, we're spies, we're thieves. Like those people would be part of any kind of rebellion like this, like any kind of thing like this that's going to take down an evil system like the Empire. So it's even seeing Mon kind of not being, probably not being bloodless in that was interesting.
Right. And, I think Perrin sets it up pretty beautifully in the beginning of that episode in the conversation, kind of weaving around Mon. And they're doing this very interesting dance, that couples who know each other for a long time do, where they don't know how many meanings or shades of meanings are necessarily behind the things they're saying. And so you don't know whether he's actually accusing her of cheating on him or not, or whatever, but he's just trying to needle at her a little bit or a lot. But then his conversation or his note on Tay, it's a full-on Shandy wedding. He grew up 4 valleys away. He should know you have to pace yourself or pay the price. And he was always weak. And that sort of just resonates through the rest of this because, that he was always weak part sort of plays out because, I think if you were to really look at Tay, yeah, sure, his wife's left him. He's got a bunch of, quote unquote soured investments, but what's the reality in the financial world? If you wait long enough, things will get better. The stock market crashes one day, 2 weeks later, it goes back up. That's the reality of the situation. So I have a real disbelief that Tay is on the street without a bed here. So
unless he's made, has some debts to, because he knew Davos Skolden, who was going to be Lita's father-in-law. Like, so maybe it's something with that of like he owes bad people money and he needs it, or his life will be in danger. So, but his life is in danger now, so I guess he's not any better off.
Yeah, and but you just don't get the feeling like that's what this is, right? And I think if it had been something like that, you would have seen maybe the character would have been more. Tay would have been more like, "Hey, I've got debts I've got to pay that have come, because of this stuff, and there's these people after me now, and I need your help." It's not, at no point is he really asking Mon for help. He's just asking Mon for, money, effectively, or recompense.
Right.
So I think that's one of the primary thrusts. The other thing we get 2 other kind of vignettes within the wedding feast, day 2, and one of them is the wedding hike, which is it's an interesting little side conversation, mostly between Mon and Vel. What did you take from that?
Yeah, I mean, it was you like it's just interesting hearing how they're like this is kind of what I assume is just kind of the high class of Chandrila. It's like what the elite do is these elaborate wedding feasts and these multiple night events, but you probably have your average person, your middle class or lower class probably don't engage in all of this kind of theater like they do. So but yeah, I think in this one is when when Vel's talking about, she hasn't heard from Cinta in a while, and she's doesn't know what's going on. And she's kind of like Vel. You kind of get the sense Vel is kind of lost too, because she's kind of having to just play the part of this socialite on Chandrila, and you don't really know. But she was part of the Aldani heist and a big part of that. So I kind of get the sense she's like itching to get back to the action, but she's also kind of being held in place and having to kind of go through these go through this theater of this wedding, all to play the high class socialite, kind of pretend everything's okay. Because I think that's what they talk about after Aldani in season 1 is, I think Mon says like play the part of the rich girl for a while or something like that. So
yeah,
it was interesting as well. Yeah, and yeah, we'll definitely see more how that more plays out in the next episode.
Yeah, and I like, I think the way Mon ends the conversation is with Vel saying there's work to be done, and Mon says you have to live to do it, don't you, or don't we? And I think that speaks a lot to what's going on with Mon right now. Is her, because I went back and rewatched a little bit of Rogue One and some of the other material, and so by Rogue One she is fully embedded in the rebellion, right? She they have conversation with Jyn Erso pretty early in that movie. She is talking with the intelligence officers. So to me, we're going from Mon as sort of slightly disconnected financial, but also inside the Imperial Senate trying to make things work from a political standpoint. And, by the end of all this, she is going to be full-blown embedded with the rebellion and how it works. And I think what we're seeing is sort of a transition. This whole series is going to be her transition from that place of being part of the Senate, trying to work politically to overthrow the Emperor or find a path forward or help people that way. And then the full on, okay, we have to do things as a rebel alliance. I have to form a rebel alliance and I have to do things as a rebellion. And this sort of, this conversation, I think, is sort of the two different worlds where Vel basically just says, like, what I want is secondary to the rebellion. And that is, Luthen is sort of that to the extreme, right? There is no I anymore for Luthen. There is only the rebellion. And Andor is somewhere in the middle of that. And Mon is sort of on the other side. And I think this 3-part episode, we find her in some ways coming to terms with it, but also sort of hating the fact that she has to come to terms with it. Because I think she likes her life. The reality of it is.
Yeah, and I think she also she knows the Empire is going to have to fall, but I think, like you said, she's not there. She's not at the point yet where she's she still thinks they can do it politically, potentially, and that they can work. That she still thinks the system can work, but as we know, the system will not work. And because I think when she eventually defects from the Senate, which we do see that in Rebels, in that one Rebels episode where she's actually is picked up by the Ghost Crew because she's fleeing Coruscant, which I think we will see in Andor. We're not those episodes haven't come out yet, so I don't that's just my speculation. But I think they're building up Gorman in a big way that I think that's all going to be a part of it. And then also we get I don't know if y'all talked about it last week, but we get Erskine, who is her kind of senatorial aide, or kind of her one of her employees. He's actually in that Rebels episode as well. So
okay.
He was it may have been more in the last episode but yeah, he's in these two as part of that. So I think we'll definitely see, like, in that set of episodes will be kind of the turning point where she basically, flees the Senate and like leaves everything behind, potentially even her daughter and her husband, or maybe they're killed in all this. We don't know, because they're not mentioned again after in Rebels and Rogue One and beyond. So she's gonna have to that's coming to a head, I think, very quickly for her.
So what do we think of Parent's speech?
Sagrona Teema.
Sagrona Teema Solo.
Yeah. I liked his speech. Like I said, I don't think he's not a good husband, but I think he's a pretty good father, I think, to Lita. Like, I think he really does care for her. He really does want her happiness. And we saw that in season 1, where he was like, Lita almost kind of had more affection for him than she did for Mon. And I think because Mon was kind of split between two, her senatorial duties, but then also like starting this rebellion thing. And she was kind of didn't have time for the home life. But Perrin is basically just the husband of a senator, and I assume he has family money and is just kind of a rich guy that just kind of socializes and gambles and parties and whatnot. So he has time for the home life. So I think he is a good father, and I liked his speech. He's talking about, there will be things that come between you and it's just the way of it. Like, there's nothing you can do about these things that will come at you, but it's how you handle them and how you find, the happiness in between those things that will kind of keep you keep you on the right path. And he's also kind of speaking from his own experience of like, he and Mon are really just a marriage of convenience at this point. I mean, they're not really in any kind of a romantic relationship anymore. They're pretty much just, they live their own lives, and they cohabitate, and they co-parent, but they don't really have much of a close relationship anymore. So I think in his mind he's hoping that things will turn out differently for Lita and her I forget her beau's name, or her future husband's name, but I think he's hoping for better for her than what he has.
Yeah, I think I liked Parent's speech and I hated it. And I think it's because he comes so close, and I think this is purposeful within the speech. He comes so close to the truth of it, right? Pain will find you. If you let it, the galaxy will overwhelm you with anxieties. Things will turn bad. That's just how things are, right? Which is the truth, right? It's part of life. We live in a broken, fallen world. Bad stuff happens. Bad stuff happens to good people. That's just how things are. Bad stuff happens to bad people. And then he says, pleasure, gaiety, amusement, these are the hidden things, right? And then he says, joy, real joy. And so, like, he's skirting, the truth of it, which is, something we know as Christians, which is the real joy that exists with, uniting oneself with Christ can buoy you through anything, right? That's I can get out of the boat in the storm and walk with Christ, and without him, I'm sunk. And that's the real joy. But what Perrin points to are sort of simple pleasures, right? A good meal, a good conversation, old memories. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with those things. Like, I enjoy those things. But it's not like the thing that buoys me through the hard times, right? But it seems to be that is Perrin's outlook. And that strikes me as sort of this, like, that's the hedonistic worldview at its sort of kind of baseline. And I think that kind of speaks to sort of where most of sort of the upper crust of imperial society formerly Republic Society, future Republic Society, like lives, right? That's where they live. There is no, there's no unifying sort of underlying religious force. There's no, no dedication to the force. There's nothing that buoys them along other than sort of this, hedonistic desire for an amusement or gaiety. And so, parent speech, while I do think it comes from a place of love for his daughter and the desire that they have a better life than he does in a better marriage, like it's sort of, in my mind, it's kind of a poisoned speech.
Yeah, it definitely has those more than that initial layer, like you said, because we see that kind of play out in the New Republic, and I think it's in Mandalorian season 3 when you have I forget the doctor's name, the doctor who is experimenting on Grogu.
Yeah,
when he's brought into the Republic. Yeah, when he's brought in, he gives his whole speech, and all the upper society is like, "Oh, you're so great, you're so great." Like they're just looking for kind of entertainment and their next thing, like that. They're kind of next amusement in a way. Whereas, you have characters like, like Mon Mothma and the others who are on the other side of that are like trying to make things better for everyone. But then you have the parts of society that, really will stay the same, no matter who's in charge, because they have the money and the resources to, live their lives as comfortable as they want. So yeah, I do agree. Like it did have some moments of that, that second layer of like you said, getting away from what, really should be the point of your marriage. So.
Yeah. All right. So, was there anything else about this episode that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, because we kind of jumped around in the story threads, but it was a really cool ending, seeing Cassian fly away in the TIE fighter, and you see, because you don't know what planet he's on. They've done they've identified the planets that they're on. Like it'll say, Mina Rao or Chandrila or whatever. It'll tell you where you are. But that was, and I mean, I think a lot of people were speculating this was going to be Yavin, even in the trailer when you saw this. But yeah, it was really cool seeing him fly away, and you see the temples, and you see the red giant Yavin above, and in just a few years' time, really in a couple of years in the timeline, this will be the home of the Rebel Alliance. So I thought that was a cool kind of final touch to end on.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about the music a little bit, because the opening music for this was very different from the opening music for season or for episode 1, and it's going to be different for episode 3 as well. It's very tense. It's very tense and intense music, and same for the beginning and the end of this episode. To me, it's interesting because the music through most of the episode itself is not necessarily very tense or intense music. We do get some, in particular, there's a set of music that's sort of in the background whenever they're on Mina Rao. And it's kind of a wind chimey sort of music. It almost sounds like it's kind of background noise, but it's not quite. And it has this beat that moves into it it sort of sets up this tension within the music itself, and it grows, right? And it's the same thing that's going on the screen in Mina Rao throughout the course of this episode and throughout the course of the three episode arc, is this building tension with the Empire being there. And I think it was a really good job of integrating the music into that feel especially in this episode. And if you watch the end credits, the sort of intense music that you get at the end of the episode eventually ends, and then you fade into the music you have that plays while they're on Mina Rao. And then if you listen to, because there's nothing really to watch except for names, and so you listen to the music, you feel the tension build and build and build in that song until it finally ends. So as always, I've loved the music and how they've done it on Andor, and they keep seeming to do a pretty fantastic job. So let's give a shout out to the music director. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for this episode of The Secrets of Star Wars. We would like to take a moment to thank our patrons, including Matt and Jolanda C., Sean F., Rachel T., Bob C., and Nathan H. Their generous donations help us to create The Secrets of Star Wars and all the shows here at StarQuest. And you can join them at sqpn.com/give. And now we'd like to hear from you, our listeners. What are your favorite things about this episode of Andor Season 2? You can let us know by sending an email to send an email to starwars@sqpn.com or on our social media pages, or by leaving a comment on our channel on the StarQuest Discord server, which you can find at sqpn.com/discord. And over on that Discord server, you will find both a spoiler and a non-spoiler channel, so feel free to join in on either side of the conversation, depending on what you have and haven't seen so far. And until next time, Jeff Haecker, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Wars.
Thanks, Pat, and once again, Sagrona.
Sagrona Teema. Sagrina Toma. And once again, I'm Patrick Mason. We'll be seeing you along the way. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.
Here's another podcast on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/secrets.